So, you think you know motorcycles, do you? You know your Bruff Superior from your Ducati 900 SS. Machines that have made their mark and offer exhilarating ways to see the world. Well, we don't think you can claim to really know motorcycles unless you've heard of these 5 two-wheeled oddities. These are some of the weirdest and most wonderful models that have ever made it into production. So how many of them have you heard of? Maybe let us know at the end in the comments. And if you do like this video and you look at these bikes and go, whoa, that's a bit odd, remember to drop it a like and then subscribe to the channel and ding that bell icon to make sure you see everything we do on YouTube. Let's start with a bike called the Quasar. Now, our scriptwriter knows more about bikes than the rest of the team put together, and even she struggled to find much information about the bizarre Quasar. The Quasar was designed by Malcolm Newell and Ken Lehman in the early 1970s, although it definitely looks like something from a decade or two later. It was, quite frankly, bizarre, and brilliantly, it's completely bizarre in concept as well as design. This was a semi-enclosed, foot-forward motorcycle capable of speeds of over 100 miles an hour with the engine and gearbox from a Reliant Robin. Yeah. As if the Robin didn't already suffer from having too few wheels. Anyway, the rider sat inside rather than astride the Quasar, and it had a sloping, streamlined roof while the engine sat up front sending power backwards. Production picked up. Slowly, taking until 1975 for the first bike to be actually slotted together. Quasar production would then bounce from manufacturer to manufacturer before eventually a grand total of 21 would be made with the original Reliant Robin engine. Several more were nailed together with the engine and driveline from an actual motorbike, and a few were even made with the even more out-there concept of a hub-center steering system. More on one of those later. Production somehow managed to labour on until 1982, but despite its relative failure, it did actually eventually end up inspiring a generation of equally as bizarre prototypes. Now, you probably didn't expect to click on this video and at some point hear the words Nazi fighter. But that's pretty much how the Indian 841 gained its provenance. Early in the Second World War, it was becoming clear that the Allies needed a machine equal to BMW's mighty R71, which was beginning to dominate the deserts of North Africa. The task went out to tender in the US, and it was those two stalwarts of American biking, Harley-Davidson and Indian, that put forward proposals. While Harley went with an evolution of its WLA military bike that had been fitted with an engine, transmission and drive shaft that had been pretty much directly reverse engineered from the BMW, Indian went further and gave the 841 a brand new longitudinally mounted V-twin. This was specifically designed for military use with a low compression ratio so that it could run on very low octane fuel. With its relatively small 25 horsepower going through a 4-speed gearbox and a shaft drive, the 240kg 841 tickled all of the US Army's fancies, and Indian was given £350,000 to build 1,000 of them. But the 841 already had a bit of a problem. By this point, the Willys Jeep was as good as the BMW R71 and was capable of carrying, let's be honest, a lot more than a bike ever could. So the 841 would ultimately never see action, and the fleet was sold off and some converted back to road use. It's very rare to see an 841 today, and original US ones still in US Army spec. Well, you're probably more likely to successfully start a business selling chicken's teeth than you are to see one. But if you want to find a weird and wonderful workhorse, you won't find many better. Before we move on with this list, we'd just like to quickly say thank you very much for watching this video. We really do appreciate it, and remind you that if you do enjoy it, pop a like down. It all helps us out. Now, how about the Bimota Tessie? Tessie means thesis in Italian, as if you couldn't look at this machine and already work out that it was a bit of an experiment. It sort of looks like it could topple over backwards on its own. The Bimota Tessie had a unique steering system and had swing arms both front and rear, sort of dispelling those arguments that motorbikes really need forks. Instead, the Tessie had a hydraulic steering system with anti-dive technology. What resulted was a bike that not only looked radical, but felt it too. It was incredibly agile through the corners, and the separation of steering and brakes meant both performed better. The first Bimota Tessie, called 1D, was released in 1990 and had a Ducati 851 engine. But its design could be traced back well into the mid-1980s and a university project of designer Pierluigi Marconi. 127 1Ds were built in just 1 year. It was followed by the 1D 906, which, rather confusingly, had a 904cc engine, and then the 1D SR. Further special editions would follow, each selling in limited numbers, and Bimota has continued to quietly develop the design ever since. After going quiet for nearly a decade, the Tessie 3D, which skipped the 2 for reasons, emerged, and a failed collaboration with Custom Bike Virus nearly saw a new evolution of the Tessie appear. Eventually, in 2019, Kawasaki bought a 49.9% stake in Bimota so that supercharged Tessie H2 could be launched in October last year at a cost of £59,000. And at this point, we've got absolutely no idea what the naming convention is either. Other manufacturers have toyed with the idea of mass-produced hub-centered bikes, but the Tessie remains the only one to have been even vaguely successful. This just looks like any other motocross bike, yeah? Well, it kind of is, if all-wheel drive was normal on motocross bikes, or any motorcycle for that matter. Sure, driving every wheel has been commonplace in cars for a century or so now, but on a bike, it's still pretty novel. While in a car it can lead to safer handling and better off-road prowess, almost the opposite has been true for bikes. It makes them both heavier and more difficult to control. But that hasn't stopped manufacturers from having a go, and many, many misses have followed. But among those misses, Yamaha found something that worked. The innovative, if terribly named WR450F TwoTrack was born of a collaboration with damper manufacturer Öhlins, a company that had become infatuated with two-wheel drive bikes sometime in the early 1990s when it created its own two-wheel drive R1. In fact, the TwoTrack began its life as an exercise to homologate an all-wheel drive concept for competition on the grueling Dakar Rally. The way it worked was, rather helpfully for a bike that was designed to be used in places where help is hours away, complex. The front wheel was operated by a hub-mounted hydraulic motor equipped with a single gear, as part of a smart self-regulating system which increased hydraulic pressure to the front wheel if the rear lost traction. The amount of power to the front constantly varied. However, it would never spin faster than the rear, or faster than could be feasibly converted into grip. As soon as the rear regained traction, the hydraulic power supply to the front wheel would be reduced. And it was actually quite a success, with owners of the competition version very happy with its performance and grip. But only 445 would be produced between 2004 and 2005, and when it became clear that nobody really wanted a two-wheel drive motorcycle, the TwoTrack was consigned to the history books. Kinda sad, really. This sounds like someone trying to talk with their mouth full, and it looks like a bike if IKEA was allowed to design it. But the cake Cork, and try saying that after a few drinks, is still in production today. It sits in that sort of no man's land between weird and cool. In fact, if it wasn't for the Cork's road legal and A1 license compliant status, you'd be forgiven for mistaking it for a glorified electric bicycle. But motorbike it is, and it's one that packs a punch. The Cork's permanent magnet motor makes 13.6 horsepower and 42 newton meters of torque, which is enough to propel this skinny machine to 56 miles an hour, if you really want to. That's partly because it weighs less than the average British man, about 3 kilograms less to be precise, at 79 kilograms. The Cork also has 3 alliterative riding modes: Explore, Excite and Excel, designed to allow you to ride on road, trails and even the track. And the battery will last for around 4 hours. The technology is pretty impressive for an EV costing £10,000 too. Charging to 80% comes in 2 hours, 100% in 3, and the regen can be tuned to mimic 2 or 4-stroke engine braking. It's even got some beefy Öhlins suspension. Sure, it's a bit weird, but we actually kind of like it, even with that tongue-twisty name. Cake Cork, Cake Cork, Cake Cork, Cake Cork, Cake Cork. Those are 5 motorbikes that we'd never really heard of until we started looking into it, and if you have heard of them, well then, you certainly know bikes. But which one is your favourite, or actually, which ones should we know about? Let us know in the comments below.